This is an existential crisis of society. And that if we allow the organizational centric approach to data overwhelm and consume and dilute the people centric approach to such an extent that it no longer practically exists, we're going to end up in a dystopian world where Orwell was an optimist.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to TechStage Unplugged. I'm joined today by somebody who I've known for quite some time, the CEO of Identity Praxis, Dr. Michael Becker. Michael, welcome to TechStage.
Hey there. Thank you very much. I'm excited to be here.
Fantastic. I'm excited that you're here too, because what we're going to be talking about is a super important subject for all of us, not only the people that are in technology, but I think the broader audience for that matter.
Let me just introduct on this. We're talking about digital identity, and honestly, I believe this to be the most important topic for society globally that we could be tackling right now. And our ability to properly harness it and leverage it appropriately over the next, say, 10 years will dictate the next 50. This
Wow.
is one of the most important things we as human beings can be addressing at this point.
Well, that's why we're here. And we want to spread the word and make sure everybody is aware. And I know, Michael, digital identity seems to be more than just a professional focus for you. What sparked your interest in the space to begin with?
Well, I honestly, and not to get going too far back, is it goes back to when I was like 8, 9 years old, and I didn't know what the terms meant. Um, but my career, all of the elements kind of projected me towards that process of understanding what identity and digital identity was. I first started learning about it in the mid 90s when I started thinking about building relationships with people and what did that mean. And then around 2004, I started one of the first commercial text messaging platform companies in the United States. And I started thinking about this connection between marketing, business development, sales, organizations, and started realizing that as marketers, we're collecting a lot of data about people, and that data becomes important, and then we can use that data to personalize and to drive advertising. And as a byproduct of my career, I tend to throw myself into the deep end of things when I don't understand them, because I learn best when I'm like on the edge of drowning. So on that note, that's why I started my doctorate back in 2004, and it took me 21 years to finish it. That was really kind of the impetus. Is around that 2004 timeframe is when they all started codifying for me, because I started a text messaging company. I was interested in commercial B2B, B2C sales. I was interested in marketing and strategic marketing. And I was asking myself this question: how do we use all of these mediums and all of this data that we're collecting to help properly connect with and serve people? And at that time, I didn't know anything about what I was talking about. I started this text messaging company, and I jumped in and helped found the Mobile Marketing Association in the United States. In that process, I sat on its board for 8, 9 years. Near the tail end of my tenure with the Mobile Marketing Association, I was actually its managing director for 3 years in the United States. It was really over that kind of 2004 to 2011, 12 timeframe that my understanding of this concept of digital identity and attributes and data and all of that started to kind of come out of the primordial soup that is what we call society today. And things started, crawling out of the soup and solidifying. And that's when I started to truly understand it. But when it really hit home for me is it was 2010, I believe. I can look it up. And I was the managing director of the Mobile Marketing Association. And I was being interviewed by the Wall Street Journal for a expose series that the Wall Street Journal was doing on personal data and on privacy. And the whole series was around what they know. And they were doing this expose on what do apps know about you. And I just straight out said in 2010, I said, in mobile, we have to be very clear. There is no anonymity in mobile. The
Yeah.
mobile network knows everything about you. The mobile application provider knows all of your behaviors and all of your interactions. So there is no anonymity in mobile. And I was quoted on the front page of the Wall Street Journal, and
Because it's important.
I almost got fired over it
Oh, wow.
because the at the time the CEO of the Mobile Marketing Association said you can't say that, and I said but it's the truth, and he said yet our members of the association generate money from using this data. So you can't say that kind of truth because that's just going to freak everybody out and damage the industry and advertising as we know it. Well, fast forward 15 years, we all now know the implications of what it means when we say there is no anonymity in mobile, and there still isn't. And
Hmm.
so the
Hmm.
whole point of what we mean by data and what we mean by digital identity is critically important. So long story short, one of the most defining moments was that quote in 2010, there is no anonymity in mobile.
Yeah.
And one of the defining moments for me is in 2004 was when I don't know anything about data. I don't know anything about really much about marketing. So what am I going to do? I'm going to start a trade group. I'm going to start my doctorate. I'm going to found a text messaging company. I'm going to bring those pieces together and I'm going to figure it all out and start stitching the pieces together. And that's what I've been doing for the last 20 years.
Makes a lot of sense, but also one of your defining moments sounds like it was a moral push. Do you do what you think it's right, or do you do what you are expected?
And I'm going to do what's right, or at least what I think is right. And then I will stand up and defend what's right. And if anybody wants to challenge me, great. Let's have that conversation and that challenge. But that moral lens is really important for me.
So it feels to me that we've been in this tipping point about digital identity that is no longer a nice to have, but a necessity for a very long time. But very few of us are truly aware of what's going on. Do you think, Michael, that businesses and consumers, for that matter, realize it now, or we still have a lot of work in order to spread the awareness?
We have an unbelievable amount of work. And I think we need to be careful when we talk about this idea of digital identity. What actually is that?
Hmm.
And are we properly doing the effort to define it? And I don't think we are.
Sure thing.
There was an Australian agency that coined the term digital. We are now physical and digital beings. And in today's increasingly digitized society, honestly, our digital self has more economic value than our physical self. If we don't have a curated digital presence, we functionally don't exist in society.
Yeah.
And that's going to become increasingly more when we start going cashless and we only have digital currencies. And
Hmm.
so, what is an identity? What is my physical identity? When I need to assert a claim about I am Michael Becker, what do? I either pull out a piece of plastic, here's my physical driver's license, or I pull out a piece of a mobile app and show a digital identity. They're one and the same now,
Hmm.
right? So what do we when we refer to as digital identity is nothing more than a series of constructs of pieces of data that culminate into our ability to assert a claim about ourselves or about our things, to be able to say I am this or this is my thing. And that assertion will come with a certain level of certainty, meaning self acclaimed. I'm Michael
Hmm.
Becker. Well, how do you know? How can you trust me? All the way up to a level 4, absolutely guaranteed government backed certification that you, in fact, know I am who I am. And so digital identity is really a spectrum of assurance from I'm trusting you to what you're saying to I don't need to trust you because I can validate it and cryptographically assert it with 100% certainty on the other spectrum. And so really that's what we need to be learning about when we're thinking about what digital identity is and how do we as business deploy it. I can continue on, but I'm going to pause there and let you react.
But I think it's a good point to pause and say, if you were talking to a kid and you wanted to explain to him or her how important it is digital identity, what would you say to them? What one or two sentences? How would you try to explain to them such a complicated subject matter?
In the movie Incredibles in 2004,
That sounds interesting.
And in that movie, there's a scene where Elastigirl is flying over the ocean with her daughter, and her daughter has superpowers, and
Mhm.
they're trying to protect themselves. And Elastigirl says, V, your identity is your most powerful possession, protected at all cost, right? Your identity, who you are, is the most important thing to you, and you need to protect it. And in today's digital world, what is identity? Identity is equivalent to data. So in today's digital world, young Nasia, 9-year-old Nasia, what do you
Mhm.
need? You need to be protecting your data at all costs because it is who you are. It is your existence. It's how you navigate society. And if you are not in control of your data, then somebody else is. And so therefore that means they are in control of you. And what does that control mean? It means they're making decisions on you. It means that they could be either being doing good on your behalf or causing you harm. But means you if you are not in that control, it means you have no agency over yourself.
Yeah, and we'll get into that particular aspect of agency, but it's interesting that most of us wouldn't leave our passport or our physical IDs laying around, but then we don't think twice about giving our digital credentials away every single day. So we just need to be more cognizant overall of what and how we disseminate our information.
Right. And I think we've gotten lulled into complacency by big tech, by big society,
Social media.
social media. It's all gotten very, and part of what has ended up happening is because it's gotten overwhelming, we've fallen into what I've learned from many coaches and guides and along the way is
Mhm.
we've got to be very, very careful to not fall into the problem of the three C's. And the three C's are convenience, conformance, and comfort
And
and conflict.
comfort.
And so what's happened is, you know, using my Google or Facebook social single sign on to log into things is really convenient. It's very comfortable and it
Mhm.
conforms to societal norms. But in that process, it also then lets me abdicate any accountability, agency, or responsibility I have for myself. I'm expecting Google and Amazon and Facebook to take care of me and to do the right thing, as opposed to doing the right thing for myself. And we're saying, oh, but a password manager is too hard. Well, when your data gets breached and your identity gets hacked and you experience harm, don't be mad at anybody else. Be mad at yourself because you abdicated your accountability and responsibility for yourself. So I
That
think,
brings me,
yeah, go ahead.
Michael, this brings me to I think this is gonna tie it all together, right? We hear the term quite often that it's about self sovereignty when it comes to identity, right? And verifiable credentials and decentralized identity. And you touched upon a few of them as you've been explaining to us about a digital identity and what it means so far. But at the core of the issue, digital identity, what does it really, in simple terms, tries to solve?
Okay, let's go back to it. I don't like the term digital identity, just so we're clear. Very,
All
very clear.
right.
And let me say, it's identity
Mm-hmm.
because we are phygital beings.
Mm-hmm.
The,
Mm-hmm.
the blurring between my physical identity and my digital identity in the practical sense doesn't matter anymore,
Okay.
right? Because my employment identity, my social identity, my they're all becoming one and the same. So we just need to be talking about identity. And increasingly, how do I assert my identity in the physical world? I show somebody a digital credential,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? I wave my palm at Whole Foods, and Amazon reads the veins in my palm, which then gets associated with some data they have in the background, which is tied to a foundational identity, aka my credit card that says this is Michael Becker, right?
Yeah.
So all of these kinds of elements of what we refer to as digital identity are all blurring together. Now, when you raise this idea of self-sovereign identity, it's a really important concept, and it's here today, and it's fundamentally changing the nature of the world going forward. But it's not new. It's in fact been envisioned 50, 60, 70 years ago, and it's been The standards and the technology and the development has been well underway for the last few years. And it's
Mm-hmm.
just now getting the technical elements of what we're calling self-sovereign identity are just now getting productively deployed in society today. But let me take a step back and provide us some definitions.
Okay, that will be
So
fantastic.
so really quickly, when we look at the world and when we think about digital identity today, there's basically three general constructs that you need to be thinking about. The first one is what we'll call centralized identity.
Mm-hmm.
And centralized identity, using the Amazon example, is I go to Amazon and I create an account. I've got Amazon and I've got Michael Becker, and I create a username and login account. And so when I go into Amazon, I log in. Um, and I've got that one-to-one bind between who I am and Amazon. And to create some security layers on that, I might add like what's called two-factor authentication. So Amazon will send me an email or text me or look for a facial biometric to be able to bind that username and password I gave them with some other secondary or multi-factor method of authenticating me: fingerprint, palm print, facial recognition. The idea that I've got my mobile phone with me. So that idea of centralized identity is one concept. Then we move to the next level, which is called federated identity. So I've
Mm-hmm.
got, and in this case, let's stop using the Amazon example. I've got Wells Fargo, my bank. I have Michael Becker, and now I have Google, Facebook, Amazon, or Okta, these what's called federated identity services. So let's use the Google sign on as an example. So I create an account with a bank, but rather than creating a username and password when I log into the bank, to facilitate conformance and convenience, has integrated with Google's sign-in capabilities. So on the bank's website, it says sign in with Google. So what's happening is I had previously created an account with Google. So now when I'm logging in with the bank, I'm signing in with my Google credentials. So that I sign into the bank goes off to Google, says, this person's signing in with these credentials. Are they valid? Google comes back and says yes, and lets me log in. So I'm now using what's called this federated single sign-on service to be
Mm-hmm.
able to log in via that service. Now, here's the problem with that traditional centralized organizational approach is everybody in the chain knows everything.
Yeah.
Google knows every time I log into my bank. Google
Yeah.
knows every time I log into the restaurant. Google knows every time I go and do log into that app, right?
They
And
can
they
sell the
can
data to advertisers.
data, they can drive that data, all of that. If we
Mm-hmm.
have in today's conversation, we should also be talking about it's not just the identity of me as Michael Becker, but it's also increasingly going to be the identity of my assets, my house or my car,
Mm-hmm.
or my phone or my watch, or the identity of my non-human agent, aka my personal AI, who will then be in very short order be making decisions on my behalf. Right. So my ability to manage these identities is critically important. So now brings in this concept of self-sovereign identity or self-sovereign data, because remember,
Mm-hmm.
identity and data are the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Identity in the digital context is a construct of different data properties that roll up to be recognized as me. All right. So in the self-sovereign world, you move from that data being centralized in corporate databases to
Mm-hmm.
that data being centralized at the individual level,
Yeah.
decentralized identity. We're no longer managing identity attributes in the company's databases, but rather what we're doing is taking those identity attributes, that identity data, and putting it on the person's phone. We're putting it in control of the individual or decentralizing it out to the individual.
Mm-hmm.
And so, in the world of decentralized identity, in the world of self sovereign identity, what it means is I, as an individual, am in control of my data. When someone issues me a credential like my driver's license, let's say California State. So, in this new world order, California issues me a driver's license digitally. So, that driver's license gets issued to me, the holder, and it gets put into my personal information management service or a digital wallet, an app on my phone. And then over here is a bar. And so I go to the bar, and the bar says, are you over 21? Well, in the old world model of centralized and federated identity, or even physical identity, I pull out my driver's license, or I pull out my digital version of my driver's license in an old world example, and I'd show them my driver's license. And I gave them my age, my weight, my eye color, my address, my physical address, my full birth date. when in that context, all that person needs to know is yes. So when California issues a driver's license, they issue me my driver's license as a certificate that I'm in control of. And then they also publish in what's called a public ledger a public key into a public ledger that can be looked up.
Hmm.
So what ends up happening is I get my driver's license, I go to the bar, I show the bar my digital wallet, which is today mostly implemented by a QR code on my screen on my phone, which they scan. And because of my biometrics and because I'm in control of that key, I'm the only one that can be presenting that at that moment in time. And then what the bar would do is their systems would go out and look up at the ledger and ask that ledger a question. Is the person that is presenting this credential to me over 21? And the answer from the ledger comes back and says, yes. I'm
And
not
all
giving
that in real time. So there is
all
no
that
big delays or
in real
anything.
time. So I'm not
Yeah.
giving them my birth date. I'm not giving my address. I'm not giving them my date. I'm just giving them the insight that they need, which is yes. And if
Hmm.
you think
Hmm.
about them, the actors, the issuer of the credential, the holder of the credential, me, what's called the relying party, the restaurant, the bank, the bar, the etc. And then in the middle is like this public ledger that anybody can look up against.
Hmm.
Now that new model is such that when I go and use my digital driver's license, the issuer, California, for example, has no idea when and where I'm using it, right? Because they that refer the bar can look up in the ledger and anonymously check that I'm over 21, and so now I get my privacy back. Now I get agency back. Now I get control of my digital identity and my verification. And then the last part of this model that I've been doing here, issuer,
Hmm.
holder, what's called relying party. There's another party down here, which is the governance models. How do we make sure that all of that is in fact trusted and there's trust frameworks and such? And that's called the trust diamond. And so what that whole structure that's being rolled out into society now as a new layer to the internet, as a new layer to digital, is actually creating what's called zero trust, systemically trusted uses of data and digital identity in society today, which it means that that data is now in control of the individual. That identity is now in control of me, the individual, and not the big tech corporations, not businesses.
No, I was going to say that makes a lot of sense, and it's about time because when it comes to privacy and convenience, that's always been at odds. So let's make privacy convenient enough so we don't have to make the choice and hand over
Right.
our most valuable resource, which is our identity.
No, no, which is our data.
Well, data, identity, they
Smarter.
collide.
People need to understand this because it's
Hmm.
our data.
Yeah.
Sounds very technical, really is. How do we as businesses deploy it? Right, because I'm assuming our audience is primarily business users and not the 9-year-old or grandma, that kind of thing, right?
Yes.
How do we as businesses deploy this? We
Hmm.
as businesses need to both understand the technology of it, but then not talk about the technology to our consumers.
Yes.
What we
Yes.
need to do is provide value added services that give consumers all of this underlying safe, secure, privacy preserving experiences without the technical language, but simply with the value proposition. And let me give you a great example of that. There
I was
is
just about to ask you, so go ahead.
a new startup in Copenhagen called Kin. It is a
Kin, Kin. Okay.
KIN, and it is a personal AI.
Hmm.
So I can download and use Kin, and using Kin, I can ask this AI questions about me and my health and my life and all of that. And the AI will spit back answers, and I can be having this really important conversation with this personal AI with Kin.
Hmm.
Why would I ever go use this personal AI like ChatGPT and serve up all of this private data into the servers of Microsoft or China or the Chinese government? That
Hmm.
sounds really scary. Why would I do that? Well, Kin is based on all the self-sovereign identity standards that we just talked about technologically. So when I have that personal AI conversation, all of that data, all of those conversations are happening locally on my device, are encrypted with my self-sovereign identity private keys, and absolutely no one in the world can access that data but me.
Oh,
So
wow.
now I can
That's a
actually have
game changer.
game changer. But if you look at Kin, And the marketing pieces of kin, they don't talk about self-sovereign identity. They don't talk about all of the technology. They just say, here's a private service. What will end up happening over time is then they're going to say, and as the technology evolves and as people get more comfortable with this, you can then start saying, now that you own and control and have self-sovereign agency over all this data about you, think about what else you can be doing with all of this data. And that's how the industry is going to evolve. And frankly, all of this is what was the basis of my doctorate, in talking about how do we encourage people to understand and adopt the things that we're talking about today. And one of the first stages in the discussion section of my doctorate is I talk about how companies really shouldn't be having the technical conversation with their customers. It's also about building the next generation infrastructure and architecture for your company that protects you from being hacked. It makes you more instantly regulatorily compliant, because one of the compliance and all these new people-centric regulations, one of the things you have to comply with is making sure that people have access control of their data. But in a self-sovereign identity infrastructure, you're giving them access to your data immediately as part of the delivery of the service. So you're also instantly regulatorily compliant. You're also creating new potential commercial business models and monetization models for your business by building on top of this new architectural standard that's being deployed into the internet as we speak.
And sounds exciting to me, but I think it will be also important to address, because a lot of the people in the community that you and I are circulating with in the telco side of the world, Michael, when they talk about identity, they talk about mobile identity mainly. And from what you've been telling us so far, mobile identity is just a fraction of what has been happening and going on out there. As a company looking to ensure that their users are protected, their customers are protected, their employees are protected, do we oversimplify things with mobile identity,
Yes,
or are
yes, yes, and no. It's all the devil's in the details, right? So when we often will talk about mobile identity, what we're referring to is the use of the phone number as a proxy for identification.
yes,
And
yes.
so if I'm in control of that phone number, then therefore I am that identity, and I then can represent myself in the market. And some of the leading carriers and mobile operators that understand this and get this
Hmm.
are implementing this kind of self-sovereign methodology in their business. So
Hmm.
when you use this phone number, it's under the self-sovereign control of the individual. Mostly when we talk about mobile identity today, it's the carriers trying to do single sign-on with your phone number,
Hmm.
and they're
Hmm.
trying to be the Google of mobile, right?
So
Sign
it
in with
doesn't
their
really
phone number.
solve the problem.
It doesn't solve the privacy problem. Carriers, Google,
Yeah.
it puts the carriers in control of your data. It puts all of that. It doesn't really solve and that's where, and again, part of the challenge is for companies, it's really difficult in that we're so addicted to the crack of all of the data that we don't really want to, we're too afraid to implement self-sovereign identity. We're too afraid to give the data to the hands of the consumers, because we don't want to lose our golden egg that is all this data we're currently having. And that's the transition that's happening in society. And so if you go back and hear any of my keynotes that I've been talking now for well over 15 years, that's why I talk about the meeting of the waters, called the confluence, where two rivers meet. The Amazon River meets with the Rio Negro. And when the two rivers meet, they don't. And the Amazon River is like a cappuccino, a light coffee colored river, and the Rio Negro is this really dark black river. And when the two rivers meet, because they have different speeds, temperatures, and densities, they don't merge. And it takes 4 miles for these two rivers come back together. So you're sitting there on the edge of the Amazon, and some parts of the Amazon are a mile wide, and half a mile of the river is black, and the half a mile of the river is this cappuccino color. They're not merging because they're different properties. The exact same thing's happening in the world of digital identity and data. Half the river is cappuccino, half the river is black. Half the river is organizationally centric controlled data. And that's why I say this is an existential crisis of society. And that if we allow the organizational centric approach to data overwhelm and consume and dilute the people centric approach to such an extent that it no longer practically exists, we're going
Yeah.
to end in a dystopian world where Orwell was an optimist. We're going to end up in a world where Brave New World meets Lord of the Flies meets Soylent Green meets Handmaid's Tale, right? No control, no agency of self. If we allow the people-centric approach to overwhelm the organizational-centric approach to the point that it no longer exists, we'll have this pipe dream of an Huxleyan-like island. But the problem with that is those utopias never scale, and they get chaotic in their own way and fall apart. So what we as society need to do is find the middle path. It's the middle path between dystopia and utopia. And I call that panutopia the identity nexus.
Mhm.
This middle ground where we're not fully centralized and we're not fully decentralized. We are in a hybrid model. And in that hybrid model, we've created a macro environment where the value to risk reward ratio of the exchange of identity between individuals, public institutions, and private institutions, and then the net value exchange of this personal data amongst the community commons is at a macro level. It's at an equilibrium state. And I call that equilibrium state the identity nexus. And that equilibrium state at a country level is going to be measuring like unemployment. And we need to be solving this formula. And whoever solves this identity nexus formula is going to win a Nobel Prize, just like Eleanor Osterman or Williams did with transactional cost theory. That's how important it is for us to find this equilibrium state of the flows of identity and data within society. And this is
Mhm.
what's happening in society today, is
Mhm.
us trying to figure out how do we balance and manage the value exchange versus the risks of this data and this identity flowing into society. So when we're looking at this role of implementing centralized identity juxtaposed with decentralized identity, we need to find ways to merging them. And most major companies are really struggling with this
Mhm.
because they're needing to do what Scully called in 99 an Isaquantic shift. This is not just a simple paradigm shift. They're changing everything. And it's like a tsunami that's rolled over the lands of the world. And as the water's receiving, the topology of our technological architecture, of our regulatory frameworks, of our cultural expectations, of our business standards, they're all different. It's new. And that's where it gets scary, and that's where it gets confusing. And we've just got to find a way to methodically and incrementally go down this path as we allow these waters to merge. And most companies are really struggling with this because they don't want to do the investments and they don't want to kill the golden goose too
I
soon.
think it's more the latter because I'm sure they're making investments in other areas, AI being one of them, as we hear.
How do we explain what digital identity is?
Yeah.
Digital identity is data. Digital identity is, and the question is, who is in control of the data? There's centralized identity and data that's in control of organizations and government, and there's
Mhm.
decentralized identity and data that's in control of the individual. And to today's world, as we've talked about, we've got both paradigms happening, and those paradigms are starting to merge. And just so that your listeners understand this is not a pipe dream. This is happening. I gave a keynote in Bhutan, and I gave 3 talks in Bhutan last October. And Bhutan is the world's first country to launch both national digital identity legislation and national digital identity infrastructure. And what that means is the world, what's starting to evolve into the world is private public good infrastructure. So countries like Bhutan are launching foundational digital identity tokens that are decentralized and being put into the hands of the consumer, such that the foundational identity is now essentially free. And public institutions like banks are connecting into that private public good infrastructure to facilitate like new customer onboarding.
It's like Bhutan is one of the cases that they're getting it right. Because I was
Right.
going to ask you, Michael, who's getting it right?
The Magic ID is getting it right. There's a whole world of businesses that are now starting to MasterCard, Visa. They're all kind of working on this. But here's the thing: because the technology is conversation because so complicated, they're doing it, but they're not telling you about it.
Hmm.
Because what they're doing is they're building the infrastructure to create decentralized, differentiated trust behind the scenes. And once all the pieces are in place, then they're going to unveil it. Other players like Data Sapien are doing it right. They're giving this infrastructure to companies so that shopper loyalty retail programs can be built on this kind of concept. So the loyalty program can get all of the insights, but none of the raw data.
Mhm.
So now You might think, well, Bhutan's a small country up at the top of the world. They're the lighthouse of the world,
I,
shining.
I was thinking about it.
The answer is February 2024, the European Union passed the EI 2.0 legislation, which
Mhm.
mandates that every single member state do exactly what Bhutan has done in the next 18 to 24 months. And the EU has invested over 50 million euros across 11 different pilot project studies like onboarding and cross country interoperability at passport control, consumer payments. I can send you a list of those too
Mhm,
for
mhm.
references on this. So what I'm saying is within the next 18 to 24 months, every EU member state is going to have a digital identity wallet, which will be potentially in the hands of those consumers, which means that every EU member state will have a public private good infrastructure that is going to fundamentally change the nature of the way businesses work going forward. And it's going to take years of adoption for this to roll it out. And I'll leave you with this. Think back in 2007 when social media was first launched. We're like,
Mhm.
who would ever talk about what they've been eating and publicize that on dinner? But so one, who's ever going to use this? The other thing was smartphone adoption, high bandwidth internet adoption, the trusting of doing commerce over a mobile phone adoption, the regulatory frameworks. None of those existed in 2007. So in order for Facebook to get, say, 20, 50%, 30 to 50% adoption of social media on a global basis, it took them about 12 years. Okay, so from 2007 to 2019, took Facebook about 12 years to get 3.2 billion users adopted into the system. And they had to overcome all of those impediments of adoption and commerce and technology and internet bandwidth and all of those things. All of those impediments are gone. So what took Facebook 12 years to do is going to happen in this society in about 3 to 5.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we've got about 2, 3 years to wrap our heads around this and start implementing it now for this to start happening. And that's the other message I want to convey to your listeners is this is going to happen fast.
It's
Really,
happening
really
now and it's going to happen
happening.
fast because we learn from other things. So the adoption will be
And
even faster.
all the impediments are gone.
Hmm.
The cultural impediments, the technological impediments. What's not the impediments that we're working with now are consumer understanding and adoption, which will always be a thing. And my doctorate shows me that people are ready. They just want to be educated. The other impediment is interoperability. How do we enable interoperability between these different infrastructures and trust systems? And there is a foundation that has been created. And let me get the URL for it. It's IRA, ARYA foundation. Is it was formerly the GAN Foundation. Yeah, it was formerly the GAN Foundation, and they just rebranded like 2 weeks ago. It's ARYA, I believe. Change it. If you go to GAN Foundation, you'll find them. And we're a new trade group in the world that's working towards helping create interoperability amongst these trust ecosystems. And once that interoperability piece is in play, the speed to which these changes are going to happen in society are going to be mind-boggling. For businesses, that's going to create an unbelievable new opportunity for new trust, new business models, new commercial models, new revenue models, overlay micro crypto payments on top of that. And we're just going to have an incredibly exciting world.
Well, Michael, this has been a fascinating chat, and I think our listeners will find it very useful. So, if somebody wants to get in touch with you in order to learn more and get involved around digital identity, how and where can they find you?
Yeah, well, you can find me on LinkedIn. So just look me up, Dr. Michael Becker, or my handle is the Privacy Shaman. And part of the reason why I say that is, we talk about privacy in society today, and privacy is about control, giving control people and control the who, what, when, where, for what purpose, and for how long people should have access to you physically or digitally. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me at identitypraxis.com. Yeah, that's my consulting business. You can also find me at the 5 C's of Knowledge Management School. So 5 C's of Knowledge Management.com, which is a school where I teach people how to take control of their identity and data and start personally managing their insights and data. Those are the 3 places.
Sounds fantastic. Michael, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
So I would say, folks, that is it for now. from TechStage. And until next time, keep learning. Ciao,
Thank
ciao.
you. Bye bye, everybody.